As we speak, there is a ceasefire in the Middle East between Israel and Hezbollah in place. It's set to last 60 days and then lead, the hope is, to a permanent arrangement. Let's look at what this really means. Hezbollah, of course, operate mainly out of Lebanon, so this should bring peace to Lebanon. And if it holds, it's going to allow 100,000 or more Israelis to move back into northern Israel. They fled from there over the past year as Hezbollah has bombarded them. And it's going to open up they had then opened up a new war against Israel, of course, within hours of those Hamas atrocities in the south of Israel on October the 7th last year. So for more than a year, it's been impossible for people to live in northern Israel. Now, this is a major victory now for Israel because it's taken out most of the Hezbollah leadership and reportedly destroyed at least 80% of its rocket arsenal. Hezbollah has now abandoned its pincer movement with Hamas, while the ceasefire is with the Shia terrorist outfit. Hezbollah is, of course, funded and controlled by Iran and tolerated by Lebanon, and the US and France have been involved in negotiations, so there are many unseen players here. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made it clear that if Hezbollah breaks this ceasefire, it will pay a heavy price. The war against Hamas in Gaza, at the other end of the tiny country of Israel, continues, but the hope must be that Hamas surrenders soon and releases almost 100 hostages it still holds. I want to show you what Israel's ambassador to the United Nations has said. He said this to a Palestinian representative at the UN, because I want to show you this because it actually highlights precisely how the Palestinian leadership continues to let its people down.
You are an expert of blaming Israel. For 77 years in this organization, you always said no, and you blame Israel for everything. What I'm trying to offer you is future, to discuss future for Palestinians in Gaza. But in order for that to happen, you have to say no, not to Israel, to say no to Hamas. Once you will have the courage and the ability to say no to Hamas, no to terrorism, you can speak about future for Gaza.
Yeah, it's about getting rid of Hamas. That's the #1 priority for the people of Gaza, that's for sure. Let's now go to Alex Rivchin, the Executive Council of Australian Jewry. He joins me live in Sydney. Thanks for joining us, Alex. Tell us about your sense of this ceasefire, how important it is, and what are the chances that it can hold? Because it essentially puts back in place a UN resolution that's been around for more than a decade, and obviously Hezbollah has repeatedly breached.
Yeah, look, I'm quietly optimistic about the prospects of peace holding, and not because Hezbollah has agreed to anything, not because UN peacekeepers will be back in southern Lebanon, not because of international assurances that Israel won't be attacked again. I'm confident because of the deterrence that Israel's managed to reinstate. They have utterly destroyed Hezbollah's military capacity. They've killed their top 10 leaders, including Nasrallah, who was considered untouchable for about 20 years. They have done untold damage to their morale and prestige with the pager attack and the guile and ingenuity that went into the planning of that attack. They've sent a very strong signal to their patrons in Iran. They've taken down the smuggling routes of weapons from Iran to Syria and then into Lebanon. So Hezbollah's ability to wage war has been severely degraded. But more than that, they've been taught a very powerful lesson. If you mess with Israel, you're going to suffer bitterly for it. And that, far more so than any international assurances or peacekeepers, is what I think gives this ceasefire prospect of holding long term.
Look, I think you're right. It's clear this has come about because of Israeli strength, not because of diplomacy. In fact, it's a bit of diplomatic guile, I think, to call it a ceasefire. It's closer to a Hezbollah surrender, which is exactly what Israel needed and wants. But the question then is, what about southern Israel and the fight against Gaza, fight against Hamas in Gaza? Does this increase the chances of Hamas surrendering and returning the hostages, because it's left alone now without the pincer movement of Hezbollah in the north?
I don't think so. Hamas has been also degraded severely. They no longer exist as a coherent fighting force made up of battalions. It's basically clans and small guerrilla outfits that wage attacks and then flee away from Israeli fire. So in terms of central planning, coordination, that sort of thing, it doesn't really exist anymore. So I don't think they'll be looking at what's happened in the north and be compelled to surrender on that basis. I think they'll fight it out to the death. But it does mean that Israel can redirect its resources back into the south, back into that front, and the war to finally defeat Hamas and rescue the remaining hostages. Because we have to remember that Israel's army is predominantly a civilian civil army. It's made up predominantly of reservists who are workers, professionals who are called up to serve their country. And it's taken an immense toll on families and on the economy as well. So the fact that the northern front, which could have been perilous for a long, long time, has now been freed up will be a huge relief to much of the country.